Portland is Oregon's gateway to the rest of the world. And more than many other states, Oregon's economy depends heavily on foreign trade. Tonight, KGW gets an exclusive invitation to sit down with President Barack Obama and his top cabinet secretaries as they push to increase foreign exports in Oregon and around the country.
We are always interested in making sure that we're promoting jobs and business here in the United States.
We asked, will Obama's plan create new jobs in Oregon?
I'll go anywhere and do anything in terms of making sure that we're creating good American jobs here.
And will it grow our economy well into the 21st century? From KGW News, this is Straight Talk at the White House with Laurel Porter.
Welcome to this special edition of Straight Talk from the White House. I'm Laurel Porter. The president invited us here for this Oregon exclusive to talk to him about trade and to ask him some other questions. So we took some issues of critical importance to the Northwest directly to the president himself. Mr. President, we're here talking about trade, and new numbers out show that Oregon merchandise exports hit a record high of $21 billion last year. And I know you want to increase trade, but there's some worry that our export boom may turn to a bust in Portland because of what's happening at the Port of Portland. I know you sent your labor secretary out and facilitated an agreement at the docks. However, a couple of days later, we still saw slowdowns, we still saw tension, and our biggest container shipper, Hanjin Shipping out of South Korea, has announced it is pulling out of the Port of Portland effective March 9th because of the slowdowns in large part, taking 80% of the business, millions of dollars, and hundreds of jobs. What can be done to try to avoid these slowdowns in the future? And are you willing, Mr. President, to help us convince Hanjin Shipping to stay at the Port of Portland?
We'll definitely be talking to folks in South Korea because Portland's done a great job. And I sent my labor secretary, Tom Perez, out to resolve this standoff, but it's going to take a little bit of time to work through the backlog. It does send a message, though, I think, that we've got to have cooperation between the docks, between the workers, because our economy depends to a large degree on exports. And no place is that truer than in a place like Oregon. You mentioned $20 billion, $21 billion. That translates into about 90,000 jobs. And typically, export-based jobs pay much better than jobs generally.
The president is really counting on you, but you've had some people line up against this deal, and I received this flyer at my house.
They came to our house.
Did you get one too?
In Southeast Portland.
And this is paid for by the AFL-CIO. It says, tell Senator Wyden to stop fast track. If Senator Ron Wyden allows fast track to happen, Oregon will suffer. It talks about unsafe food coming into this country, that environmental protections would be destroyed, jobs would be lost. You've had inflatable blimps being flown over your town halls by the internet community saying, don't betray us. You've had people virtually camped out in your offices. The unions say they've sent thousands of emails and voicemails. I mean, how are you standing up to all this pressure? How would you describe the climate right now for you?
It goes with the turf. I understand that. What I've tried to say to those who are protesting or raising these questions, look, you have valid concerns. I just mentioned the question of unprecedented transparency. I mean, I thought the critics were right. There was excessive secrecy in the trade debate. Let me give you another example. The critics have said there has been inadequate enforcement of trade law in the past. That is absolutely true. So we have included a whole host of measures, starting with the Enforce Act. This was a piece of legislation that I wrote after my office and I did a sting operation. We heard that there were countries in Asia that were in effect merchandise laundering. They would get in trouble in their country by not complying with the countervailing duties laws to make sure that our industries were protected. They just shipped through somewhere else. We had a sting operation. We caught them. And we now have a whole new set of enforcement tools to go after those kind of rip-off artists. So on the basic issue where Oregonians have asked me, hey, Ron, why are we talking about a new trade agreement when we're not enforcing what we've got? We have a host of new measures. I'll give you one other that a lot of those critics used to dream about, and that is they would say that the enforcement of trade law would come too late. It would come after a company had closed. So for the first time, we have an early warning system. We have a system to, in effect, watch for import surges so as to protect our industries. All of that is brand new and is what the President and I said we were going to do in putting together the most progressive trade proposal ever.
Let me ask you about that, because I asked them about NAFTA. I know you've said it's like NAFTA on steroids. And they said a lot has been learned since NAFTA in the last 20 years about trying to strengthen the labor, environmental, and consumer protections, something that Senator Wyden is working on. Do you have any confidence that that would be the case?
Well, first off, all 29 chapters are classified secret, except they're shared with 500 multinational corporations on a real-time basis. As a member of Congress last week, I was going to go to a secure room without notes, without a pencil, without a pen, and read some of the chapters and see if they've changed. Last time I read the environment, as an expert on the environment, former senior Democrat on the Resources Committee, totally non-binding, meaningless. Countries would have to adopt laws that said they're going to observe environmental protections, but they don't have to enforce them. So that's no different than the non-binding side agreement for the environment that Clinton used to pretend that, the NAFTA agreement protected the environment. Non-binding never happened. Same thing with labor. This does not have any enforceable labor protections. In fact, it would allow the Vietnamese to continue to use prison labor, child labor, and pay 56 cents an hour and not allow labor unions. None of that's true. I'm sorry.
John Kitzhaber made history on election night, becoming the first person to win a fourth term as governor of Oregon. Despite the victory, it was a bruising campaign, with Kitzhaber facing scandals and heavy criticism in the final months. Now, he's looking forward to 4 more years leading the state.
I think the issue is you have to reprove yourself to the voters every single time you're elected, and I think I've got some rebuilding to do, and I'm very confident that I can do it.
Tonight, we sit down with Kitzhaber for his first on-camera interview since the election to address the criticism, his plans for the new term, and the ethics investigation still hanging over his head.
Let me ask you a little bit more about this ethics investigation. They began their official review in the past week. They're looking into whether Hayes Consulting work violated ethics law, but if she benefited personally, privately from her public role as First Lady. Do you think that there's any possibility that you and she might have made a mistake and might have violated ethics law?
Well, I can certainly tell you that our intent was to make sure we put the appropriate sideboards in place. I mean, I don't know what the Ethics Commission is going to rule, and again, if we made a mistake, I definitely want to know about it. We don't want to make it again.
We believe everyone has a right to know if their food is genetically engineered, and that's exactly what Measure 92 would do.
I want to step back just for a second, because I was reading a Rutgers University survey that said that 54% of Americans know very little, if anything. They say they know very little or anything about GMOs. 25% never even heard of them. So if we could just briefly describe for our viewers, define what genetically modified organisms are, just briefly, and I'll ask you each your definition.
Exactly, yeah. GMO is when you combine the DNA in a laboratory of different organisms that would never come together in nature. And later on, I'd like to talk about some examples of how that technology has been deployed in the country, but that's the definition.
And Dana?
Well, what it is, we've been, cross breeding since the beginning of agriculture, and this is just a more precise way to get a desirable gene trait into a different kind of crop. It's just something that's been done for the past 20 years, in fact.
And what do we know about the safety of GMOs?
We don't know very much, actually. Here's a few things that we do know. One, the vast majority of genetically engineered crops grown in this country are designed for one purpose, and that's to spray the plant directly with massive doses of weed killer herbicides. And as a result, herbicide use in this country, we're using more of that than ever before. And that used to be when you sprayed herbicide or a weed killer directly on a plant, the plant would die. Not anymore. So we're using more of that. It's going into our air, into our water, and then directly into the food we eat. Second, and this is quick, is that the federal government does not require genetically engineered food to be independently tested for safety before they are sold to consumers. That's a big problem.
What about consumers who are concerned about the safety?
The safety. This is the most studied food in our entire food supply system.
Tonight, Mayor Hales joins us to discuss a range of issues affecting the city of Portland. From KGW News, this is Straight Talk.
I want to talk to you about housing issues. if you do a Google search of Portland and housing, it is unbelievable the number of articles, national articles, that come up about this. CNBC just did an article this week about this, talking about how hot the housing market is in Portland. That is both good and bad.
Yes.
It's very much a seller's market. So if you are selling your house right now, it's not uncommon to have 10 offers, and a lot of them cash offers for over the asking price.
Right.
But here is the rub. It's becoming increasingly difficult for people who have a middle income in this part of the world to live in the city in which they work. Are you concerned about that?
Absolutely, Reggie. I think this is one of the big issues of our time, and that is, it's great that Portland is economically strong now. We created 18,000 new jobs in the city last year. We had the fastest gross domestic product growth of any city in the country. And that's wonderful, and any mayor would celebrate that. But we're also in danger of becoming San Francisco, where working people can't afford to live in the city itself. And not just me, but everybody in public office, I think, in Portland, certainly the whole city council and the county board of commissioners, we're all talking about this. Again, in my budget, basic stuff, I've put $6 million more into housing in this budget to try to help create more affordable housing. And the county chair has proposed even more money in her budget for that.
Frustration, anger, even rage in Ferguson, Missouri, after a police officer shot a young black man named Michael Brown. The ensuing protests exposed a rift in that community and around the country.
Right now in Portland, according to the most recent census numbers, it's about 6.3% black in the city of Portland. We have a little more than 600,000 people who live here. So this is kind of falling into your category, exactly what you do day to day, which is to try and bridge that gap. Right. What is it that your office is able to do to make things better as far as this racial divide is concerned?
Well, a good piece of it is education, understanding. I think as Dr. Bethel was describing it, it's implicit bias. Everyone has it, and what's it based on, and how does it impact how we do what we do, how the city delivers its services and puts sidewalks here versus over here. So trying to create an understanding of who has been historically underrepresented, what has happened to the black community, why the black community should be expected to respond the way that it does, and it has.
Here in Portland, we've seen protesters in the street, some peaceful and some not. Tonight, we sit down with incoming Portland Police Chief Larry O'Day to discuss the relationship between officers here and the communities they serve.
I think you can look at the Ferguson case and say reasonably that Michael Brown has some culpability here. He got into a fight with a police officer, and most of us know that's typically not going to end well. That led, though, to the cry of hands up, don't shoot, which I think could be another way of saying what the outrage is: stop shooting us. Okay, this is what people are, I think, the most upset about, especially in neighborhoods of color. How do you go about changing that?
I think for police departments, it's in a couple different ways. You have to, your community, you've got to be reflective of your community as a police department. So you've got to be diverse as a police department. That will do a couple things, and that was one of the other things I talked about when the mayor introduced me as the next incoming chief. By having a diverse police department reflective of your community, that does a couple of things. That allows, there's a certain level of trust when anybody in your community can look in your department and see somebody that looks like them, has the same culture of them. You've got to focus on building relationships in your community, and your philosophy of enforcement really needs to come from a relationship-based philosophy. And here's what I mean by that. Traditionally, for most of time, police departments have an enforcement-based philosophy. When I was hired in the mid-'80s, it was really the start of the height for violent crime in the city of Portland. And as we worked up through 86, 87, 88, 89, really a height of gun violence in here. Drugs, gangs from California influence, and a community expectation to deal with this violence. And you only have time and capacity doing that from an enforcement-based philosophy. You fast forward 29 years later, and we're at a 40-year low for violent crime. And enforcement-based strategies are not the way to come at community issues. at this point.
So you're going to try to make the police force more diverse? Is that one of your goals?
Yeah, that was the second goal that I laid out for the police bureau, is to diversify the police bureau and diversify the leadership in the bureau.